there is a new gold standard in combat-focused 4X. ZEPHON is a post-apocalyptic hellscape, bursting at the seams with sentient mechs, mutated beasts, and void horrors. From your first turns to your last, you will be fighting to survive. Its creators, Proxy Studios, have a pedigree with this sort of thing, having made Warhammer 40,000 Gladius, Relics of War. ZEPHON ups the ante. It repurposes the systems that worked and introduces others that make the experience richer. It's set in an original universe which mixes tropes of grimdark sci-fi, cyberpunk dystopia, and eldritch horror. It's intriguing, striking, and the right kind of gross. A war-torn Earth is now a scarred battlefield between the rogue AI ZEPHON and an intergalactic alien species, the Akron. Lumbering sentient machines will go toe-to-toe with otherworldly void horrors, and only one side will emerge. On the sidelines is you. You'll pick a faction, and each has unique affinities and focuses. Some embrace technology, others call on insidious voice units. Some like to keep it old-fashioned with firepower and Gundam suits. Whether you're keeping the peace or taking the fight to the other factions, every match will lead to an inevitable final confrontation. Machines versus monsters. Pick a side, or take on all challengers. You're trying to keep your technological advantage, expand to take key outposts across the map, adapting to the world and your enemies. From start to finish, you are engaged in bloody conflict with the powers that be, and making use of the game's tactical combat system. If you're looking for pure, unadulterated combat on an epic scale, you'll find it here. This is ZEPHON. Before I get too deep, I want to address the elephant in the room. The comparisons to Gladius. I'll get it out of the way, so I don't need to keep going back and forth. If you played it, ZEPHON will feel very familiar. It utilizes the same combat system, units and abilities are treated similarly, cities, research, even the UI is cut from the same cloth. Now, I don't see that as a bad thing. They're solid mechanics, and Gladius was a good game. Proxy Studios made some top-notch systems, so by all means, reuse them. This isn't a reskin though. Most of it has been tuned, streamlined, and improved. At first glance though, yeah, it will look and feel very similar. That means a couple of things. If you loved Gladius, gelled with its systems, and wanted more, ZEPHON will click with you straight away. On the flip side, if Gladius's mechanics just didn't do it for you, chances are you'll have the same problems with ZEPHON. For the rest of the review, I'm just going to keep on ZEPHON and treat it as its own entity. Also means I won't have to say Warhammer 40,000 Gladius Relics of War anymore, which is just the world's longest name. Anyway, unlike your traditional 4X, ZEPHON steps away from the usual balance. War isn't a consequence, it's an inevitability. From your very first turns right down to your last, you will be fighting to survive and prosper. There's a real sense of strategy. Every unit has its specialty. They have differing ranges, abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. Soldiers can use attacks of opportunity, and controlling the flow of movement on the battlefield is crucial. There aren't a huge number of units, but everything has its place. Furthermore, unlocking a new one doesn't invalidate another. You'll research tech that improves old units, meaning even your tier 1s have a place in your developed army. Cannon fodder mostly, but that's still a use. There are 3 affinities in the game: cyber, human, and voice. Any faction can dabble in any specialty, but you'll have an easier time acquiring and utilizing those in your chosen affinity. You can, of course, focus only on your default path, but having the ability to mix and match opens up some interesting combinations. Your bread and butter soldiers are complemented by a range of powerful and specialized units, doing everything from bombarding units from afar, flanking to attack in melee, or just getting up in their business with long gangly legs. There are also powerful hero units, who periodically unlock skills, equip units, and single-handedly alter the outcome of a tough fight. Units gain experience after kills, and if they aren't in battle, they're falling behind. You're pretty much fighting the entire game, against ZEPHON, against other factions, or against neutral enemies, defending, expanding, and leveling up your units. You might think that wears thin, but it doesn't, because the combat system is nuanced and robust. It becomes the core of the game and everything else is built around it. And in every skirmish, war, and conflict, I was having a blast. But while you're ripping and tearing, you have to keep that war machine turning. You have to keep developing, expanding, and advancing. Now, this isn't Civilization. You aren't dealing with culture or arts. You aren't trying to make this hellhole into a utopia. Your city's function is to provide resources and units to throw into the ever-growing conflict. Cities acquire tiles one by one, and each has a few slots for buildings. Different tiles provide different bonuses, and those can be boosted further by outposts. Unconventionally, ZEPHON doesn't have resources on the map. All the materials you need can be produced in your cities. At first, I was skeptical of this, as those resource nodes usually become key points of conflict, but ZEPHON has an alternative: outposts. These capturable buildings provide a passive bonus, which is increased when it's in the influence of a city. These are the points of the map you are trying to spread towards and capture. Another small detail that I loved: tiles can change. Swarms of cicadas can change location, moving their food bonus, and forests can sprout up in new locations. Another feature that is, again, unconventional to your typical 4X is that cities can produce multiple things at once. Different unit types and buildings all at the same time. This means you aren't building a reserve and waiting till you're strong enough to fight. You're always churning out units and getting them on the front line. There is no downtime. The research tree is divided into tiers, and only requires a few techs to advance. If you want a beeline for one specific powerful unit, you can, but you still have the freedom to go back and pick up older techs. Some options give you units, or buildings, or access to advanced resources and items. Others simply provide passive bonuses to something you already unlocked. Your older units keep getting upgraded and stay relevant. This and the city system, they're streamlined. I wouldn't call them elaborate, or exciting, or innovative, but they do what they're supposed to. There's definitely an element of strategy that will reward experience, and there's very little bloat. It is a good system, and exactly the sort of thing a game like this needs. Something that isn't going to draw you away or distract you from your ongoing campaign. So, we've established there's a lot of fighting, but there are opportunities to make some friends along the way if you so choose. The main power struggle is between ZEPHON and the Akron. Machines versus aliens. Every match builds to a boiling point where you will have to pick a side or be the last one standing. But there's nothing stopping you picking that side earlier. You will be in contact with these powers, as well as the other factions, and if you want a bit of respite, you can call a ceasefire, or even push for an alliance. The actions you take with the other factions ripple across the game. Everyone has a stance, and taking a fight to a common enemy might reveal an unlikely friend. Despite this being absolutely the last place I'd expect a good diplomacy system, it's actually pretty solid. You don't have many choices, but the third-party agreements and consequences give it a bit more depth. Not to mention, every faction addresses you differently, with different text lines depending on who you're playing. Not a huge thing, but more than I see in some 4X games. If you decide to go for an alliance, you can see it change the AI's behavior. They'll look to step in and reinforce if you get into a scrap. Worth noting, both you and your ally earn combat experience when you're fighting together, so it's a benefit for all parties. The AI just seems competent. In my time playing, I noticed more often than not the AI was playing well. I noticed no cheating, no foul play, no hidden bonuses, just smart moves using the game's systems. Whether that's utilizing cover, trying to surround my forces, or even pulling a false retreat into an ambush. The AI was, to be honest, smarter than me most of the time. So across the board, mechanically, the game is a really tight package. It plays well and it feels great. The combat, its core pillar, is a lot of fun. At the end of the day, that is what is most important about a game like this. However, all of that can fall flat if the world and setting does not pull you in. Gladius had the advantage of having a few decades worth of 40k lore to draw from. But here, they're building a new IP. Can it have that same impact without all the world building? Well, yeah, because they have knocked it out of the park in that whole regard. The setting they have built with ZEPHON is excellent. It mashes together a bunch of genres, a feeling of post-apocalyptic human survival mixed with cyberpunk tropes and eldritch horror themes. The world is vibrant in some places, barren in others, a hellscape in between. The unit design is fantastic. It starts grounded. Human marines, mildly mutated beasts and slightly augmented soldiers. But as you progress, these get more outlandish, more unhinged. Great beasts with excess limbs and dozens of fingers, and human torsos fused with machines. But it goes further than looks. Every unit has flavor text. It paints a picture more vivid than simply horrible monster with too many arms, often giving accounts of a survivor describing such horrors. These were well written. They were vivid and, a lot of the time, quite unsettling. but I read every single piece because I was so into this world. These, combined with the art style, the events, and the small narratives, it all meant that this felt bigger than just a strategy game. This isn't Gladius with the Warhammer removed. It felt like a fully fledged IP that really stands its own ground both in personality and gameplay. The setting they've built feels different. It's got similar themes to its predecessor here and there, but they've clearly gone in their own direction, and with it, created something really distinct. The gameplay is tight and streamlined. The user experience is painless and intuitive. There is the right amount of excess to fully complement the main function of the game. That is, to get stuck into massive battles sweeping across the map. It doesn't suffer from that late game burnout that plagues the genre. Throughout the game you're engaging in small skirmishes and it's all building to a climax. And when that comes, the game is almost there, and you want to see it through. In most 4Xs, those late game battles boil down to a dozen stacks slapping against each other. It becomes a chore, but it didn't grow stale here, because every unit has its own special function and is important. And it's also worth noting that it ran like a dream for me. No late game slowdown, no bugs, glitches, performance issues. Units performed their moves as smoothly at the end as they did at the beginning. And I wish that wasn't a surprise, but here we are. It just works. On the flip side of all of that though, there were a few issues I had with the game. None of these were glaring red flags, but little touches and details that took me out of it. I think the sound design is great. The unit animation sounds and music give it a feeling of depth. However, when you aren't fighting and you turn the music off, it feels a bit empty. Some noise from the cities or from the Titanic late game units would really fill in the blanks. And while I'm talking about those bigger units, the animations just didn't fit their stature. When they get hit, they judder to represent that, but it just doesn't feel right. They don't make slow, lumbering movements. They don't have the impact they should. They just feel like normal units, just bigger. There's also some quests and events that spawn, and a bit of a dynamic feel to the world. I was so on board with this, as they force you to play reactively, but they happen a few times in a match and then that's it. I'd have really liked to have seen more of this whole part of the game, and growing in impact as the game progresses. I did really like the writing across the board, though some characters are certainly written with a bit more flair than others. Now, that doesn't bother me. Some might find it a bit jarring, but I like the mix of styles. What I did have an issue with is when these characters have a ton of personality and distinction when you play as them, only for them to be boiled down to a caricature when they're an opposing faction. But let's call all those what they are, nitpicks. Little details, small improvements I'd like to see or feature tweaks to fill out the game. Fundamentally, ZEPHON is not a sprawling 4X with infinite options. It's not a grimdark version of Civilization. It knows it's not that. It is a war game first and foremost. There are other systems turning with it, but they all feed back into that primary purpose. What it sets out to do, it does that very well. Remarkably even, given the tiny size of the studio. It is polished, refined, and despite some unorthodox approaches to systems, it settles in and becomes a very comfortable play. There's always something going on in the world, a new threat to respond to, and the pacing means that the looming final showdown comes quicker than you'd expect, after hours have just melted away. They came into the game with a vision, and in most regards they have seen that through. Some minor bugbears and missteps do not take away from this being a great strategy game. A worthy addition to any 4X fans library. It may not tick all of the boxes for everyone, but that subset of the genre who clamour for a darker, combat-heavy tactical game, ZEPHON nails it. Now, the obvious target audience who'll gel with this are Gladius fans, and if you're happy to drop the 40k, you'll have a great time with this. But even if you never got on that bandwagon, there's a lot here to really like. But what do you think? Gladius players, will you hop on this despite the lack of 40k-ness? If you're a newcomer to a Proxy Studios game, is an original IP more appealing over an established universe? Get any thoughts, questions, opinions, and anything in between down in the comments section. And if you've liked this review, drop a subscribe and keep an eye on the channel. I'm here nearly every week with reviews, previews, spotlights, and the likes on all sorts of strategy games. But anyway, one final time. This has been ZEPHON. Not just a spiritual successor to Gladius, an excellent title in its own right. Thank you for watching.